Hello, everyone. Today I'd like to start my reviewing series where I review books. And I would like to cover a variety of genres, share books that I love, talk about books that I hate. I'm going to kick this off with a book that I have been rereading recently, and it has been kind of getting me thinking about certain things that have been going on recently with the culture war and everything. So, the book I'd like to talk about today is The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis. And the first portion of this review is going to be non-spoiler, so you can stop it if you don't want to get spoiled. And I will tell you when the spoilers start. So, like I said, if you don't want to get spoiled, you can just pause halfway through. So, the nutshell response. So, in summary, I recommend this book. Of course, it is a very famous classic. It was written for children. It is probably one of the most famous children's fantasy, really beyond, I guess, Harry Potter is vying for the attention of many young readers today. But I think there's something really beautiful and charming about C.S. Lewis's series, and there were some of his books in that series that I think are really great literature. There are some of the books in the series that I think are a bit lacking, and I will talk about them when I get to them. So the book we're looking at today is Magician's Nephew, which is chronologically the first book in the Narnia series, but in terms of publishing, it wasn't published until later. So he actually wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe first, and Magician's Nephew came on later on down the line. Like most of C.S. Lewis's Narnia books, Magician's Nephew is also an allegory. Specifically, it is an allegory for Genesis, the book of Genesis from the Bible. So it really does deal with a lot of creation-related stories, such as the creation of the world by God, and where does sin or evil come from. In this case, it is told through the eyes of two children, Diggory and Polly. Diggory is a boy whose mother is dying, and Polly is a feisty young girl. And basically, Diggory and Polly are inveigled into going into an adventure because of Diggory's creepy old uncle. And they end up not only kind of visiting two worlds, but they also end up really introducing how Narnia really came into contact with humankind. And it's very fascinating. If you really want to know, for example, why does the wardrobe exist in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you want to read this book. There is a really beautiful sense, for me anyway, from how Diggory and Polly interact, because Diggory is actually more tender and sensitive, and Polly is a bit more tougher. But Diggory is someone with whom many people might sympathize, particularly if you've had sick parents or you've lost someone in your life. You understand kind of what Diggory is going through, and you understand how desperate a person can be in order to save the person that they love. So I would recommend reading this. It's a very simple read. I think maybe it would take most people maybe a week to read. I think if you're a fast reader, you could get it done in a weekend, because most of C.S. Lewis's books are pretty simple, and they're not very thick, right? They're not huge, thick, massive tomes like Wheel of Time or something like that. I think the language is a little bit older, of course, because it was written, back in the mid 1900s. But in general, I think most people should be able to read it and really enjoy it, just picking it up and reading it. I don't feel like you need to know much to enjoy Magician's Nephew. I don't think you need to have read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe or other books. It is really actually the beginning of the story. So if some people were to say to me, hey, should I read Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe first, or should I read Magician's Nephew? I would say go with what book interests you more. I think there's something weirdly fascinating about reading Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe first, because then you go back and you read Magician's Nephew, and then you're like, oh, there's like that moment that I kind of enjoy with this series. Now, one thing I will say is that, like most of C.S. Lewis's books, particularly the Narnian series, C.S. Lewis has a very warm writing style. It has this kind of cozy narrator that talks to you a bit and breaks that wall, that fourth wall. And some people might enjoy it. I like it. I think it's really great when you're reading it to your kids. So if you are a listener who has children, I highly recommend, if your kids are around 7 or 8, it's time to go to bed, read a piece of Magician's Nephew. It's a really good book, and it will get you talking. So overall, I highly recommend this book, of course. How could you not recommend a book by C.S. Lewis, right? Well, I guess there are a couple, like I said, where they're a bit weaker, but in general, this is a wonderful, wonderful story to read, to enjoy, to experience. And if you haven't read it, get it on audiobook if you don't like reading and you want to just, grind in a video game of your choice and you want to just listen to something. Highly recommend it. It's written, I would argue, to be read aloud. So because of the way it's written, it's really probably really great to read it on audiobook. I'll see if I can include some general links on how to get your hands on this book. Like I said, check it out, and I'm sure you'll love it. Now, let's get into the spoilers part. So the thing I really want to talk about today, the thing that really stands out to me as I'm doing this reread is Uncle Andrew, bizarrely enough. I mean, we could talk about Jadis and basically the dark feminine or even the devouring feminine. Jadis is a very powerful woman who says the forbidden word and basically destroys her country and her people. There's something eerie and creepy about Karn, and that page, if you have the original book with the original illustrations by Pauline Baynes or whatever her name was, that one page where Pauline Diggory are looking at Karn. It's just so creepy. I love it. I would love to see that in a video game, to be honest. It's just so evocative of this kind of dying world with the red sun. I don't know. It's really, really beautiful in this kind of creepy dying kind of way. So Jadis is fascinating. She's beautiful. She's powerful. And she's completely ambitious, power hungry, and evil. And there's no attempt to make her super sympathetic, right? She tells her side of the story, but it's clear from the get-go she is a dick. Let's all be real here. And that's what I really liked about Jadis. That's what I really liked about the White Witch, was that there was no attempt to kind of sugarcoat it or give some kind of reason why they are this way. Now, to a certain degree, there is something to be said about complex villains with complex psychologies and reasons for why they're doing what they're doing. And there's a time and a place for that. But if you're talking about making a point about something, like writing an allegorical story, or if you're trying to go with mythological forms of writing, you really don't want to get bogged down with the psychology. You want to keep things simple for at least one of the villains. One of the villains has to be, in my opinion, I think the overarching villain should be fairly straightforward and just plain evil. And then all of the minions underneath need to be more complex and very nuanced. But in the case of Jadis, she's pretty straightforwardly evil. And if Greta Gerwig fucks that up when she adapts Narnia for Netflix, I will be on this channel to go, nuclear. Okay, so that's Jadis. I feel like Jadis probably deserves a video of her own. She's just so fascinating. And when I get to the silver chair, I think I want to talk about the Lady of the Green Kirtle and the White Witch and Jadis, and I kind of want to wrap it up there. Today, I want to talk about a side character, Uncle Andrew. Uncle Andrew is in some ways a catalyst. He doesn't change, but he brings about great change. And he does so out of the most selfish and disgusting motivations. He is really a twat, but he's not a lovable twat, is he? He's really creepy and he's really annoying. And the more I started kind of thinking about what he's saying and what's coming out of his mouth, I was like, this sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? So let's take a little look at what Uncle Andrew is saying. So what's happened is he's basically tricked Polly into touching one of the rings. Polly goes to the forest, the wood between worlds. And Diggory is now stuck with this reality that his friend has been disappeared and he's going to have to go save her. And Uncle Andrew is just kind of monologuing about his life and, like what's going on, and he's explaining his great work. And basically Diggory is kind of waking up. He's not having any of this. So Diggory says, well then, it was jolly rotten of you, said Diggory. Rotten, said Uncle Andrew with a puzzled look. Oh, I see. You mean that little boys ought to keep their promises. Very true. Most right and proper, I'm sure. And I'm very glad you have been taught to do it. But of course you must understand that rules of that sort, however excellent they may be for little boys and servants and women and even people in general, can't possibly be expected to apply to profound students and great thinkers and sages. No, Diggory, men like me who possess hidden wisdom are freed from common rules, just as we are cut off from common pleasures. Ours, my boy, is a high and lonely destiny. As he said this, he sighed and looked so grave and noble and mysterious that for a second Diggory really thought he was saying something rather fine. But then he remembered the ugly look he had seen on his uncle's face the moment before Polly had vanished, and all at once he saw through Uncle Andrew's grand words. All it means, he said to himself, is that he thinks he can do anything he likes to get anything he wants. Okay, so let's pause right there. So we have this very, very selfish man, and we have this boy who basically sees, the truth about the emperor's clothes. And Diggory realizes that his uncle is just incredibly selfish and basically just justifying like a horrific behavior because, he's the high and lonely destiny. And one thing that's really, really fascinating is that the uncle is going on and on about like his life and Atlanta and where they got the rings from and da 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 da. When Diggory is like, what about Polly? But what about Polly? But what about Polly? But what about Polly? And yeah, it's one of those situations where I really think that this is a case where we have this boy who, we don't expect much out of children, but we have this child who is really being the mature one in the situation. And we have this uncle who is so self-centered and so narcissistic about his, grand mission that he's not even really taking into account what has actually happened. He just doesn't care. In many ways, we might suggest that Uncle Andrew doesn't even maybe view Polly and Diggory as having any real worth beyond their role. And he treats guinea pigs that way. And we might all be like, okay, it's just a guinea pig. But it clearly was a slippery slope for Uncle Andrew, right? Because it went from really not perhaps doing quite ethical experiments on animals to doing less than ethical experiments on humans, right? So I guess like Uncle Andrew is in his own world, right? And he's just totally doesn't really even see where he's gone off track. Now, one of the things that I really thought was fascinating is that Uncle Andrew justifies these things because he is a profound student and great thinker, and he possesses hidden wisdom. And so this is very fascinating to me because I have seen this kind of behavior in university among the smarter people at university. Because while I would like to say that everyone at university who's involved in woke ideology is stupid, that is not the case. There are incredibly intelligent people who are caught up and kind of stuck in the machine, or they are totally sold out and they have been radicalized by this ideology. But these people are incredibly intelligent. And some of them will often talk about postmodern theory, particularly postmodern critical theory, as if it's like some kind of enlightened knowledge that only true people will understand. And they are basically hiding the fact that their own theory that they are trying to mystify, basically, is very much, right, very much capable of tearing them apart as well. Because postmodern critical theory is probably, in my head, linked to Ouroboros, like the snake that eats itself. The theory is great for questioning why we do things and stuff like that. But ultimately, if you take it to its nth degree, to its logical conclusion, it is very self-destructive. And it doesn't actually perpetuate a stable rule of thinking. So whatever it is that you're attempting to put in place, whether you're trying to put in a capitalistic society or a communist society or some sort of socialist society, it doesn't really matter what you're trying to do. If you're trying to justify it with postmodern critical theory, you're in for a world of trouble, because it is ultimately questioning all meta-narratives, including the new meta-narratives that are coming in. So what do you do as an academic? Well, you mystify it and you shuffle it off to the side. And there is this kind of sense of like, oh, well, we're above these things. Like we don't have to be held to the same standards because we are possessed of this wisdom. And the reality is there needs to be more people coming out like Diggory and being like, look, there's some usefulness to this theory, but you can't rely on it, and you certainly cannot use it to overthrow one meta-narrative in order to institute your own meta-narrative. Like that sleight of hand is not going to work on us. We know what's going on here. So Uncle Andrew has this kind of belief that because of his hidden wisdom and his greater good thing that he's going for, like he's getting this knowledge and he's going to transform the world or whatever, he uses it as a justification for behaving like a complete prat. And I have to say that this can often happen with certain students and faculty members at universities who believe that their activism is going to change the world. And so then what do? Well, in my city, they go out and they smash small businesses because small businesses can't hit back. But if you're caught hitting a Walmart or a Canadian Tire, oh, Lord forbid, you'll get in serious trouble. So, let's go and like break windows in the small business district, because that'll show the capitalists, right? Right? Yeah, you gotta love them. So one of the interesting things is how these people justify their misbehavior by suggesting that they know better. They know better in terms of wisdom and knowledge, and they've gone to university and they've read Foucault, so now they can go around and behave like a dick in public. Or they know better in terms of morality and ethics about how to carry on with your life. Now, one of the things that was so interesting is that Uncle Andrew does not send himself, right? Uncle Andrew sends a girl. So we got to understand that this is in the context of, the 1930s through the 50s and stuff, where women were kind of treated differently. It wasn't always great. It wasn't always bad either. And in this case, there is this kind of sense of wanting to protect Polly, but there's this underlying current of you sent a girl, you didn't go yourself. And that is kind of a really fascinating thing because it really highlights, for me anyway, it really highlights that Uncle Andrew is ready to sacrifice everyone but himself for, the life's work. And basically, he's a coward at heart. He's not really ready to make actual sacrifices for what he believes. So once again, this reminds me of certain people online, particularly on X, who will make these grand statements about LGBTQ plus rights or whatever. And when there's a war, they'll send thoughts and prayers, and they'll send videos of them singing during lockdown and stuff like that. But if they were asked to actually make real sacrifice, most of them won't, right? They're only going to come out about what they believe when they believe they're in the majority, and they can basically be bullies and get everyone to do what they want. So once again, Uncle Andrew's behavior reminds me of these kinds of people. And we've seen it on both sides of the political aisle, I might add. This kind of, just not willing to make the sacrifices needed for the convictions that you hold to. And instead, you get online and you send out a few angry comments on YouTube or on Twitter, and then you are done, right? So that is kind of a whole other aspect to Uncle Andrew that you can start to think about. And the final aspect that I want to talk about, which I find so fascinating, is that Uncle Andrew finally gets to the crux. Uncle Andrew says, "She can get back," said Uncle Andrew, "if someone else will go after her, wearing a yellow ring himself and taking 2 green rings, one to bring himself back and one to bring her back." And now, of course, Diggory saw the trap in which he was caught, and he stared at Uncle Andrew, saying nothing, with his mouth wide open. His cheeks had gone very pale. "I hope," said Uncle Andrew presently in a very high and mighty voice, just as if he were a perfect uncle who had given one a handsome tip and some good advice, "I hope, Diggory, you are not given to showing the white feather. I should be very sorry to think that any one of our family had not enough honor and chivalry to go to the aid of a lady in distress." "Oh, shut up," said Diggory. "If you had any honor and all that, you'd be going yourself, but I know you won't. All right, I see I've got to go, but you are a beast. I suppose you planned the whole thing so that she'd go without knowing it, and then I'd have to go after her." "Of course," said Uncle Andrew with his hateful smile. All right. What I find so very interesting here is Uncle Andrew is evoking morals, ethics, social expectations about behavior, about chivalry, about niceties, about etiquette, about good treatment. But is he applying it to himself? No, he's not, right? He's basically attempting to guilt trip Diggory into going because he won't go himself. So once again, I just want to highlight this kind of two-faced stance, right? So you got these people online who are evoking the need to treat treat trans people with respect, or treat LGBTQ plus people with respect. And they are certainly correct. We should be treating people, because they're humans, because they are living beings with a soul and a spirit and all these other things, we should be treating them with respect. Indeed, even if stupid things are coming out of their mouth. However, it's so fascinating how some of these huge proponents for respect are themselves incredibly disrespectful, aggressive, and honestly sometimes nakedly almost violent toward people online with their words. Now, I don't think words can hurt you as much as a fist or a knife or a gun, obviously not. But it's so fascinating to me how these people have this kind of double standard, right? So they're like, oh, we must protect everyone. Everyone has their rights, so inclusive. And then the next minute, it's like they are behaving like whack nuts because someone said something that they didn't agree with. Very fascinating, isn't it? Uncle Andrew really reminds me of these people in some weird kind of way. He reminds me a lot of very negative humans who have double standards, who put the cause before the morality to a certain degree, who do not apply to themselves their own rules, who do not treat others the way they wish to be treated, and honestly, who use their knowledge or their moral position as basically a shield against any criticism. And they are justifying their terrible behavior because of their air quotes high and lonely destiny and what they're meant to do. What happens to Uncle Andrew in the end? Well, Uncle Andrew ends up broken by something even greater than him, and that's Jadis and Aslan. Because you have to understand that these people are actually only tiny pawns in a much larger cosmic duel, if you will. And they may impact our lives right now, they might cause us trouble right now, but ultimately many of these people are just specks, just dust in the wind, just drops in a bucket. And in the case of Uncle Andrew, he ends up basically humiliated by a bunch of animals. And he himself is more or less kind of humbled. Does he ever become a good person? No. No, he does not. But he at least basically is put in his place. The cosmos puts him in his place. And that's where I find the story so very encouraging, because sometimes I think it's very easy for me to look out into the world and see a whole bunch of people having great lives while at the same time being complete and utter dicks or completely stupid or, perpetuating lies or whatever. And it can be very, very difficult to kind of see that and be like, oh gosh, here I am trudging and things aren't going well, but I feel like I have tried my best to be a good person and follow my convictions in a positive kind of way. And so it can be a bit hard, but Magician's Nephew is ultimately a white pill. It's a white pill because Jadis, in the end, is not able to ruin all of Narnia. And ultimately, in the end, Jadis is beaten, right? And ultimately, in the end, Diggory is able to save his mother. And ultimately, in the end, Uncle Andrew learns to know his place to a certain degree. So that's where I'll end my review for Magician's Nephew. I hope you enjoyed some of my thoughts, and I look forward to hearing your responses down below. Have you read? Have you tried reading Magician's Nephew? What did you think? If you haven't, would you be interested in reading it? And let me know what your thoughts are on the book and on Narnia in general. You can also recommend books that you'd like me to read, and I can see if I've read them already or if I can put them on my wish list. So let me know, and I'll see you around next time.